Is there one experience in all of your time that really just made the hairs on your neck stand up and just was just absolutely mind bending? Like, is there any standout experience that you had in any of these tests? I mean, the one that you showed us on the DVD was pretty incredible. Um, is there anything else like that that really stands out in your memory?
I mean, the most mind blowing experience I had was with the patient at Harvard, where I was the psychiatrist on the consultation liaison service that goes to the medical floors, and I was asked to see this patient who wanted to sign out against medical advice. And the staff thought she was mentally ill and asked me to come and do a consultation with her. And when I went in to see her, she said, "Well, I don't need to stay. My medical tests are going to come back negative, and so I'm psychic. I can predict the future. And also there's all these ghosts here, and it's spooky, and I want to leave." And most psychiatrists would have just signed the paperwork that she couldn't leave, that she wasn't mentally fit to make that decision for herself. But I wanted to gain her cooperation, and this is back in 1989, so quite a while ago, and I wanted to gain
You
her.
were a resident at that time?
No, I was on faculty,
Okay.
and I wanted to just talk her into staying. And literally within 5 minutes of sitting down with her, she said, "I really like you. You really got this good energy." And she said, "And I'm getting a reading about you. You don't mind if I tell you what I'm getting?" I'm like, "Oh, sure, and and so then she says, "Well, your husband's a chemist," and my husband was he was an MD, PhD biochemist. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." That's my husband's chemist. She said, and he's applying for a job in two different cities right now. And that very week, he was interviewing with people at UC San Diego for a postdoc, and he was also interviewing for a postdoc back at Johns Hopkins where we met. I'm like, "Well, this is really interesting." And I said, "Well, she said, in his heart of hearts, he really wants to go one place, but you end it in the other." And I knew in his heart of hearts, he wanted to go back to Johns Hopkins. That's where we met. That's where his family lives in Baltimore. I mean, very much an East Coast person. And so I was like, "Oh, we're going to the other one." And I said, "Well, and then I said, "Well, what, where's that?" And she said, "Well, name cities and I'll tell you which one." So I just named off a bunch of cities. San Diego, you'll end up in San Diego. And oh, you'll have a daughter when you're there, and you'll be very successful. And I mean, and so that that your husband's a chemist, he's applying for jobs in two cities, and you'll end up in San Diego. Okay, well that that knocked my socks off, and I was able to talk her into staying, and her medical test came back normal. And then as time went on, and I saw that, we went to San Diego. I had a daughter. I was just like, wow, okay. So how did she know these things? And so that set the stage for my interest in this. But obviously, after moving to San Diego and having seen things unfold, I didn't have any way of contacting this person that I had met at Harvard. And I thought, well, will I ever run into another individual who's capable of doing this? And I always had a bit of a, just to me to go see, like one of these professional psychics or, palm readers, whatever. I always thought, these people, I mean, they're probably really good at reading situations. People probably give them too much information up front, and and so I always thought that these people probably are not as profoundly gifted as this woman I met at Harvard, who was not somebody who was a professional psychic. She just said, I was born with a caul over my face, which is like the afterbirth, which causes some oxygen deprivation. And it's something that apparently, there are traditions that say, if that's like a sign of someone who's going to be psychic. So she was half Native American, half African American, and she said, so she's had this gift since she can remember. But she worked as a janitor somewhere, and
Mm.
she just said it's something that I do for friends. And she said, "But I like you, so I'm willing to give you a reading." So,
Did she tell you anything that wasn't true?
no.
Wow. Because that's one of the things I've seen, when people try to pick apart psychics is they'll say that people ignore the negative data that comes in and they'll lean into the
No, she didn't tell me anything that wasn't true. I mean,
amazing.
it was so mind blowing, and it was my first experience, and I liken it to like the first kiss. It's like, and so people when they say, like, well, weren't you blown away, by working with these autistic kids? You have to understand that, decades before, I'd already had my paradigm shattered just by meeting this person.
Hmm.
And I was already aware of savant syndrome at that time. And even though I hadn't met a savant, I was like, well, we don't have a model within neuroscience that really precludes this, because neuroscience hasn't even explained, how consciousness is created by the brain, or how a lot of things, how about consciousness in the brain. So I said, so the neurosciences model doesn't really preclude it. And then I was like, and modern physics doesn't preclude it either. I mean, what modern physics tells us is that reality is not the way we perceive it, that our sense of time is an illusion. I mean, that's based on Einstein, his work, is that, time is not just an arrow that moves, in a linear fashion, in only one direction. And so, and I knew that there were physicists like John Wheeler, who said that consciousness has this interaction with realities such that, we actually co-create reality. And I knew about the double slit experiment and how the act of measurement itself collapses a light as a waveform into light as a particle.
Well, it changes the future, right? You've gotten yourself involved in the system, and now the system is different. And I think that kind of it ties back to these things as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if we could play with the mechanics of what could possibly speculate as to what could possibly be happening here. It seems that humans are electromagnetic entities at various levels, and this is a wild new field, biophotons and just the role of different organisms, not just humans, but other organisms in electrical communication. We've had a number of people on the show talking about this lately. Pretty hardcore scientists in different disciplines that are working on quantum biology. And so it doesn't seem like it. One thing that I like to say when it comes to talking about these things is it doesn't have to be fake or magic necessarily. Like those aren't the only two possibilities, right? I can pick up a little black square and talk to somebody on the other side of the ocean if I want to right now. Like I have a friend in Austria, I could just call him up, right? And if you were from 1600, that would essentially look like I was a witch or something, right? Because you don't understand electromagnetism and you don't understand how these transponders work and how it's encoded and all of this stuff. So it seems to me like, if this does prove out to be a phenomenon that's reproducible and we can eliminate all possibilities of people misleading the experimenters, then we have to start searching for the mechanics of how this is actually happening. And it doesn't seem outside, like, I don't think you need to even go into John Wheeler level physics to come up with a mechanism for how this might be happening.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, that's really what you're bringing up is really more along the lines of how I'm thinking about it. Okay. So, a lot of people evoke. So what I'm telling you is the way I was thinking 30 years ago.
Mm.
Okay. Since then, I've discovered all of this research on biophotons and the fact that we emit biophotons. Okay, at a threshold that's below most people's visual acuity, but that we do emit biophotons. And I've also learned that when people read silently to themselves, they still have some subauditory emissions from their vocal cords.
Oh, wow.
And so So I think that the information is encoded. If you think about, how is information encoded in our technology? It's encoded in basically modulation of waves. Okay, and so modulation of sound waves. Okay, either modulation of the amplitude or the frequency, and that visual information is encoded in this sort of you have these pixels and patterns of light distribution that create an image. And so it made me think that that we may be creating these subauditory vibrations when we think. We may be emitting photons that have a pattern associated with them that also has information. And one of the things we know about autistic individuals is that their sensory systems are hyperacute. They're very sensitive to light. They're very sensitive to sound. Many of them have perfect pitch. Many of them have extraordinary hearing. And so the way I see it is that they could be like other animal species that we know see and hear outside of the usual range of visibility and and hearing of most of us, and that and it's getting labeled mind reading, but it actually is just that, and that takes it out of the woo, and it's still extraordinary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
But it takes it out of the woo.